Men often find themselves blindsided by a culture that hates authentic masculinity, and many have given in and succumbed to the ever-evolving culture and woke society. But not us. We are the Remnant, faithful Catholic men from 3 different generations who reach through the radio to tackle current events that challenge our wills and empower the practice of the Catholic faith through thought-provoking discernment and prayer. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed and bombarded, it's time to turn your radio up and join us for The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Remnant. I'm Bill Snyder. As always, I'm joined by Ray Haywood and Stephen Thomas. And on today's episode, we're going to be chatting with you about traditional roles. But before we jump into traditional roles, I want to remind you that the program, the ReMENant Show, is sponsored by the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group. You can visit fsjjourneyman.com to review the easy-to-follow resource documents and consider starting a chapter of the FSJ Men's Group in your own parish today. But Ray, Stephen, how are you today?
Awesome, yeah.
Looking forward to the time and fellowship.
Absolutely. Ray, I know you have some great perspective on traditional roles, and so I'd love it if you kind of set the stage for us today.
Yes, so traditional roles. For me, that's really what brings me to everything that I do in my ministry work. I mean, all of it. The constant attacks of the cancel culture that surrounds the traditional roles that I saw coming into view in about 2013, 14, put that vital prayer into my my being. I didn't even understand what a vital prayer was back then, but it became a vital prayer for me to share with my sons, my nephews, young men around me, just how important traditional roles are and the form and the order that it places within the family. So my WIFM, my what's in it for me in all of this is to help my sons towards navigating well their physical lives while working out their salvation. With this vital prayer of mine in mind, I'd like to encourage my peers, the older men listening along, to challenge all of the younger men that they know to look at what the family in front of them looks like, to actually put them to task. Ask them, will their vocation be marriage, or would it look more like a parish family? And with full confidence, state to them, with full conviction, that a deeply discerned vocation is always accompanied by a peaceful resolve. A feeling of peace settles within us when we discern well the vocation that we choose in our lives. For so many men that are not close to the path, this is nowhere to be found for them. So many more challenges come up in their lives because it's not there for them to navigate. Question them if they even think of marriage as a vocation, let alone as a ministry. As leaders of our families and communities, let's start to take time out to make these facts into an intentionally shared awareness for our younger brothers. Now let's look through their eyes for a minute. So, how can a young man find peace in a hot button topic such as traditional roles when just saying the 2 words together for them in the company of their peers is an immediate trigger for uncomfortable feelings for so many of our sons and daughters who have succumbed to the worldly narrative of trading tradition for trend? The answer to the test here is guiding principles. At 54, for me, this is simple. I now possess the guiding principles that convict me past this chaotic worldly narrative. My past good decisions have led me and my family to good results, resulting in a peaceful life behind us all, which fuels and convicts me towards moving forward as our family's challenges grow stronger as the years go by. You know, my father, he used to say, young family, small challenges. Grown family, you're going to face larger challenges. Chipping away at making good decisions in the small challenges builds the character needed to face, well, the larger challenges as they come along. Now, let's look at how God's law and natural law perfectly complement each other, how they line up in perfect sync in God's divine design for us to use as a roadmap towards finding objective truth. In all of the situational truth that is cast upon our young souls as stumbling blocks out there in our court of public opinion. Our societal view is that the sanctity of the family is under the feet of the ruling class that holds the social capital. How about that, Stephen? I know now. The social capital in many of our public arenas. No good intent to be found there, no value in the messaging at all. And this upside down view is being unwittingly pushed down into the hearts and wills of our children in their formative years. Young men, listen along. Young fathers, understand what's being shared here. At the same time, we have this fact working against our children, that many of their parents, and my peers included, are throwing their hands up in the air because they feel as though they're not being heard. I encourage all of my brothers to keep telling your children what they need to hear from their father, but try hard to do it in a voice of humility. The objective is to reflect well, not to mirror the undermining dialogue that removes all authority. I know what I'm suggesting is not going to be and won't be easy, but nor will our judgment day if we continue to shrink back. I want to reaffirm that with every father out there, spiritual and paternal alike, that it is in our Heavenly Father's design that we listen to our parents, our fathers especially. This is like woven into the fabric of us. You know, it can't be denied. So when you got your hands up in the air thinking your children aren't listening, I assure you, they're hearing what you're saying. Their attitude and their body language may not be acceptable and it's disrespectful, but they still need to hear it. Now let's take a look at the definition of natural law and God's law. The definition of natural law is very simple: a body of unchanging moral principles regarded as a basis for all human conduct. Now, God's law needs to be intentionally sought out and is shared with us all in the New Covenant teachings. God's law is very easy for us to understand as we grow in our faith. As we read Jesus's guiding words in the gospel, which our universal church lays out so beautifully in the liturgy of the Mass, any questions we may have on our faith are easily answered for us in doing a simple search of CCC traditional roles. Bill, I know you're shaking your head. How many times have you heard this, right? So there's guys out there that haven't heard this. It's necessary. Or CCC, standing for whatever it is that you want to find. And CCC means Catechism of the Catholic Church. Really, it's that simple of a search. So traditional roles provide for our families a sense of security and order that cannot be found in any other place or area of our physical lives. This is God's divine design of the sanctity of the family, meant to be used to form the wills and the souls that the sacrament of marriage breathes into life. If we lose the order found in seeking out our place in traditional roles as God intended, we will then lose all sense of order to be found in our physical lives out in our public square. Let me leave off with what I feel is needed to be successful in finding our place in our traditional roles. And this is extremely simple. Finding simple answers is pretty much what I try to do in everything. And for men, we need respect and women need security. And the fact is, if a woman doesn't feel secure in all aspects of her life, her husband will not be shown the respect he needs to lead well the family. He will be held accountable by God for leading. There's so many things I'd like to hit on. There's only so much time we have, but I do want to mention that for any young man out there or any man who would like to speak directly on this, who something is scratching at you and you'd like to go further with any one of us, Stephen, Bill, myself, just reach out through the email that we have is the ReMenant show at gmail.com. Remember to put that A in there, ReMenant, ReMenant show at gmail.com. I encourage our brothers to go back and listen to our episode 6 on the masculine journey to reinforce today's message. What do you think, fellas? Stephen?
That's awesome stuff. I want to something that you said that stuck out to me a lot was I think it was along the lines of tradition over trends, and that's just so succinct, and yet that's everything about what we're talking about. And to kind of piggyback on what you said, we're talking about traditional roles primarily in the context of the family, and that's because the family forms the bedrock of a healthy society. And there's a lot of church teaching to back this up. We can look at the document from the Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, or the Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World. It says that. John Paul II, in his encyclical Centesimus Annus, he said, what it means to love and to be loved, and thus what it actually means to be a person. That's what he said about the family. And then even more so, we're honoring Rerum Novarum too. The Catholic Church has a vision of socio-political life that is just so profound and important. The family, when it's rightly ordered, is the bedrock of a healthy society. It is through honoring and living out the church's teachings on this subject that societies can perfect their understanding and honoring of the dignity of each human person. Everybody deserves that dignity. It's just a great evil when that is deprived of them. So my observations as a young man in today's culture, I can see quite clearly that the zeitgeist, or it's the German phrase that means the spirit of the age, is greatly concupiscent, meaning that it tends towards sin. Cultural norms of the day favor instant gratification and the pleasing of sensual appetites with no regard for the consequences. Another word for it, you might say, is, for example, hookup culture, which proliferates the objectification of all parties involved. But I think it's particularly degrading to women who, in the extreme cases, are reduced to sexual objects. And I think that the great irony of it is that this is the post-sexual revolution freedom that a lot of the framers of this movement wanted. A lot of that has been had and achieved from a basic perception. But today, more women statistically are unhappy and are on more antidepressants than ever. And I know what you're thinking. This data is from before the pandemic. Now, secular state does not favor traditional roles, and it does little to incentivize them. And in fact, it's often quite the opposite. One such example is the observable effects of fatherlessness in America. It's on the rise, and it directly correlates with an increased likelihood of crime, violence, and a future of financial and material poverty. And yet, our secular governments, by and large, would rather sweep this problem under the rug than admit to the necessity of the family and of traditional roles, even in the face of such cut and dry evidence. Bill, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think both of you are spot on. And I really like how you talk about the spirit of the age, Stephen, because it's such an important term, I think, for us to understand and for us to navigate as men through. I want to reference two songs here that are seemingly harmless, probably wildly popular among men and among recent generations of men. And those two songs are "Waiting on the World to Change" by John Mayer and "Ants Marching" by Dave Matthews Band. Like, these Two artists are huge top 40 artists. They won Grammy Awards. So their songs have an influence in our culture. And pick up on the spirit of the age that Stephen was talking about. Me and all my friends were all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing, and there's no way we ever could. Now we see everything that's going wrong with the world and those who want to lead it. We feel like we don't have the means to rise above and beat it. So we keep waiting on the world to change. And then that's waiting on the world to change. Let's take a look at the Ant's marching lyric. She thinks we look at each other, wondering what the other is thinking, but we never say a thing. And these crimes between us grow deeper and deeper. Take these chances, put them in a box until a quieter time. Lights down, you up and die. These lyrics are not necessarily hopeful lyrics. Number one, we can't wait on the world to change. If you are waiting around for the world, and that's what Satan wants, he just wants you to wait until the end of time. And this other song by Dave Matthews, I like to reference this one quite often because it's about not speaking up, and we'll get to that in the second half of our show as well. It's about not speaking up. And then there's that little quiet voice, that little satanic voice that sits in our minds that says, take these chances, place them in a box until a quieter time. Lights down, you up and die. So if you're not willing to have the hard conversation with your wife, if you're not willing to have the hard conversation with your kid, if you're not willing to stand up for your family, that's what Satan wants. Just place them in a box until a quieter time when you feel it's going to be calmer and better to speak up. And it's very, very simple. Lights down, you up and die. That's what's going to happen. If we as men don't rise up, we don't take on that role of being the leader in the front of our families. So those are my thoughts on it. We do have to take a short break here on The Remnant. We'll be right back after these messages, but stay tuned to the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hello, my name is Ray Haywood, and I'm coming to you today to speak to you about the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group, a men's group that was started under the leadership of Father Matthew Card by the intentional men of the parish of St. Thomas Aquinas here in our Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina. In our first efforts, we were asked if we would model our men's group in a way that other parishes could simply follow. With that intent in mind, we created the fsjjourneyman.com website. On that website, you can find all that is needed to create your own chapter of the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group in your parish, as well as resource documents that we are intentionally placing into our faith community. We hope that you will step closer to the path and to each other in the just model of St. Joseph as you consider creating your own chapter of the Fraternity of St. Joseph Men's Group.
Welcome back to The Remnant on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Remnant Show here on the Carolina Catholic Radio Network. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by Stephen Thomas and Ray Haywood. We're going to dive into our saint this week, and the saint is Saint Zechariah. Now, I want to mention this about Saint Zechariah, is that sometimes there is that word saint before his name, and then other times there's not. And there's a reason for that, right? Like oftentimes as Catholics, we don't say Saint Moses or Saint Elijah or Saint Ezekiel, right? But we know that these holy men and women are part of heaven, right? Specifically when it comes to Moses, we know that he appeared at the Transfiguration with Jesus, so therefore he must be in heaven, right? Like Jesus is not going to have somebody condemned to hell appear beside him in the Transfiguration. So what does the church say about this? And in those pre-Christian figures, or right, those figures that appear in the Bible that have lived holy lives, but haven't yet seen the face of Jesus, because typically once you see the face of Christ, that's kind of how you get that title saint in the Catholic Church. So I want to reference the Catechism here, because the Catechism is something that gives us clarity on this issue. And here's what it says from the Catechism. It says, the patriarchs, prophets, and certain other Old Testament figures have been and always will be honored as saints in all the church's liturgical traditions. But I just want to reference that for you because we may delve into the Old Testament and pull out people like Moses or like Elijah from the Old Testament and reference them as saints. And there is the tradition of the church for that. So, gentlemen, I'll let you take it and talk about Zechariah. Stephen, what are some of your thoughts on Saint Zechariah?
Well, I think he's a very relevant figure for what we've been talking about in the first segment. So in the biblical narrative, he is rendered mute because of his failure to trust in God's providence. It's his lack of faith. I think in a fundamental way, that lack of faith that he had, this is in talking about the conception of John the Baptist by his mother Elizabeth, and Zechariah is the husband of Elizabeth. He is revealed to him that he is going to have a son, but he's like, oh, my wife is old. How is that going to work? So he doubts. He has lack of faith. And then I think in a fundamental way, that is a rejection of his vocational role to lead his family to God, to have that providential trust. Now, it's his vocation to lead his family closer to God. For this implicitly requires a almost childlike submission to God. It's almost just not quite a blind trust, but an assurance that God will see to all things. And it's the same thing for every man, to lead his family closer to God. And like we see in the story of Zechariah, deviations from this have consequences. And I think that in Zechariah, there's a comparison to Adam also. He didn't speak until he named the child. He shall be called John. In Genesis, we read that Adam named the animals as God created them, and by that act, Adam participates in creation. So Zechariah then participates in God's will that Elizabeth bear a child by naming that child when he was looked at to do so, because Elizabeth would look to her man and say, what is this child going to be called? And then he speaks. And when he does, he brings himself back into union with God, and he is able to speak again. I can only think of how fitting this analogy is and the potential of what is possible for us to restore today if we would simply do as we ought, like Zechariah ultimately did, authentically answer the call of our vocations as men, and trust in the providence of God, who is the Lord of all things. Ray, what are your thoughts on this?
I think you placed it out there well for us, and just gonna hit on a couple of key things. So in his doubt, he was struck mute, and he was struck mute. He remained mute until John's birth, when he wrote out the newborn's name. When I relate Saint Zechariah to older men today, I can't help but think that many of us have been struck mute in our lack of faith as well, and that there is a powerful lesson for us to find in his remaining mute, even after he witnessed Elizabeth's pregnancy. It was only after he was looked to for the authority as a father to confirm his son's name that he was given the gift of speech back. So that role of authority is when he was looked to for that authority is when he was given that gift of speech back. I ask all of you, what will it take for us to find and place value back into our God-given traditional role of husband and father? When will we once again start to speak with our God-given authority? I believe it will take this type of intentional contemplation for us as men to be given our voices back. Our younger brothers need to be aware of this perspective. I encourage all of you to visit the Fraternity of St. Joseph, FSJJourneyman.com website, because I believe the beginning steps of what we are discussing here today can be found in the FSJ mission statement. Let's all assemble in the just model of St. Joseph. I believe him to be the voice of the age to come. So I'm going to go right into my ReMENant here. And my ReMENant challenge is directed towards our younger listeners this week. Truth. It's nowhere to be found. As husbands and fathers, we need to recognize that our families need to be able to turn to us to find truth. So how do we build trust, truth, in the hearts of our families? It's actually quite simple. I would even say it's an easy task for an intentional father to accomplish. We start out by building trust in our families through our children in their formative years. And this is how. When we're playing games with them, with our families, don't cheat. It's not funny or playful behavior. This is how we build up integrity as a core value in the character of our families around us. Always encourage a place where truth can be found, always correct or point out poor or bad behavior to our children, no matter who's involved. An example would be a grandfather encouraging this behavior needs to be corrected right in front of our children. Again, not funny or playful behavior. As fathers, we need to be clear in our lessons and messages. We need to never leave room for worldly interpretation in what we say, do, or share with our children and grown families. We need to be intentional in never leaving room for the sins of omission to take our children's hearts away from us when they're young. In this intent, we will prepare well our families for trials ahead as they inherently know where to turn for truth. What do you fellas think?
Oh man, that's awesome. The key word there is omission, and it's what you leave out. It's when you didn't stand up for the right thing. So that leads into my challenge, which is this: make an examination of conscience, which is a series of reflections you do with yourself. You can find different rubrics. They're probably outside your church confessional, with a specific intent to root out areas in your life where you struggle to trust in God's providence, where you have those omissions. Depending on where you're at in life, your personal circumstances will determine what that will be. It'll be radically different for different people. Once you've got that figured out, go and make a humble confession. Make a firm purpose of amendment towards a constructive solution per the advice of your confessor. They don't just say platitudes. They actually will give you constructive advice. Firm purpose of amendment means you actually change your ways. Because if you go out and you practice the same things, you don't make any substantial change in your life, you're going to go and commit the same sins more often than not. Confession is good because it is twofold in its graces. It restores what we lose through sin. It restores us back into the body of Christ. And it also gives us special graces to defend against particular sins. So if I were to confess a venial sin, a habitual sin we're likely to commit in the future, you're strengthened against committing it again. And not to mention, this is an easy thing to do, free, and I promise you, it doesn't hurt. You'll feel great afterwards, I assure you. Now, Bill, what's your ReMENant?
Right along the lines of you guys, it's very, very simple. And it's don't be silent. Right? I think all three of us really spoke to the sins of omission. And it goes all the way back into the Garden of Eden. I know we did a show on that, in previous weeks, where we talked about, Adam being one that didn't stand up for his wife, didn't step into the breach, right? And that was a sin of omission, just as much as Eve, had a sin of commission. In particular, though, don't be silent. There is so much going on in our world today, folks. Turn on the TV or look at your smartphone for about 15 seconds. We need men to not be silent about those issues. We need men to speak out, speak up, and use their voice. Doesn't matter what's going on in your past. It's, what are you going to do now? What are you going to speak up for? Those people who are lost, those people who are, on the fringes of society, the marginalized, those being in your own family. So don't be silent. That's my ReMENant challenge. And I really thank you all for tuning in and listening here today to The ReMENant. And until next time, from all of us here at The ReMENant Show, may God bless you and your families.
Thank you for joining The ReMENant today. For more information about us, email theremnantshow@gmail.com. That's the ReMENant show@gmail.com.